Hello, everyone, and welcome today. I'm Kim Spaccarotella. With me is Sasmita Mishra and Bridget Wheeler. We're from Kean University, and we're very excited to talk to you today about virtual gardening. We're talking a little today about some best practices for online gardening and nutrition education. Whether you're a home gardener or perhaps you're planning a project or study, we hope that you'll come away with some great tips and ideas, both for your own garden, for research projects related to nutrition and gardening. We'll spend a little time summarizing some of the benefits to virtual nutrition and gardening education. We'll also talk about some strategies that have been identified previously and some challenges for overcoming those, particularly in a virtual class setting. Then we'll give you some practical tips so that hopefully by the time you're done, you'll feel comfortable and confident in developing and running a virtual nutrition workshop using container gardening, perhaps windowsill gardens, doing some cooking activities online, and growing across different seasons while engaging your participants. Previous research looking at healthy eating has found that many participants feel it's difficult, very expensive to eat a healthy diet. In fact, sometimes it's easier to find low-cost beverages and foods that are higher in sugar, fat, and calories. And so growing vegetables has been an option for some at home. They can certainly cut down on the cost of vegetables and produce. And it's also an active hobby that many people of all ages can participate in. And so it gets them and their families moving while growing some healthy produce and giving them access to fruits and vegetables that they might not otherwise not be able to find easily. Nutrition education interventions with gardening have been growing over the last few decades. And these interventions can provide an increase in knowledge on healthy eating and healthy lifestyles, physical activity as well, since participants who are gardening outdoors or on a patio or balcony are moving a bit more. They also provide participants with recipes, and of course that means fuel to hopefully run the body and fuel the activities that people are doing so that they're getting healthful nutrients and healthy sources of energy. It increases their confidence with gardening skills. A class in particular can help provide community too. So there are others hopefully in the class with you who are gardening alongside you, sharing in the challenges that you may be experiencing. Previous research with gardening is often based on various theoretical models. And that's true in nutrition education interventions as well. Research has found that when interventions are based on a strong theory, it's easier to choose activities that will help participants learn and to specify outcomes and targets for the intervention. In a few moments, we'll be talking about some of the previous research with gardening and some specific examples of studies. Very often, these have used theories such as adult learning theory or social cognitive theory when providing education for adult learners. Adult learning theory provides some examples of how adults learn a little differently than children. They are self-directed, and so self-directed activities, rather than those that are only instructor-led, can be very beneficial to include. They have experiences already, and so building upon those experiences as an instructor can help participants as they learn. They enjoy practical skills that they can apply right away to their life. And the activities need to be based on their needs and their skills. So they're building on what they know previously and can apply it right away to the activities at hand. Social cognitive theory posits that action towards behavior change results from interactions between personal factors, the environment, and the behavior itself. So factors such as age, cognitions, previous experiences, access to resources, social support, safety factors, perhaps if it's safe to garden in a particular area or not, and then outcomes from performing the behavior, watching other people perform the behavior and the results, competence with the behavior. All of those are important targets for a nutrition education program and for gardening programs. During COVID-19, many classes switched to a remote format, and this included gardening and nutrition classes, as we'll see in a few moments. There are some benefits that researchers and participants noted. And certainly, these virtual classes can save money and travel time. And the instructor isn't limited by class size or even resources. Many people can join from wherever they are, and whether they are sick or well, they're able to join and participate. Research also found an increase in the amounts of fruits and vegetables and confidence in cooking skills, as we'll see in a moment, meaning that these programs seem to be effective. And of course, participants could cook right in their own home, wherever they were. And so they were able to cook in a familiar environment and prepare foods in their own kitchens.
So as stated, we did go through previous research. We actually did a full literature review of 2,238 articles, where we came down to 3 very specific articles we're going to go through today. So the first looks at Cooking Matters. This is a platform that has taught in person throughout all 50 states. And the target is to look at families in need of low budget ideas to cook at home for large families. And due to COVID, like most platforms, unfortunately, they had to switch virtual. So this was their platform, where they included 24 adults in 13 different states. They did 6 lessons via Zoom with a 26-page PDF, and they focused on food skills as well as how-tos when it came to creating shopping lists on a budget. So the results showed increased confidence when meal prepping, also high motivation to use skills such as the money saving tips. And what I found incredible was 90% of participants were pleased with the class environment, which is huge for their first virtual launching. The staff saw benefits of hosting more participants due to not being limited by one class, room size, and participants found it great that they didn't have the commuting time. And then also on top of it, they learned how to prep food in their own environment. They felt that this increased their confidence significantly because this is where they would be cooking long term. Barriers that staff did point out, though, is the engagement and the communal ties between participants. The next research was actually in person. However, it did focus on nutrition education. So it was a younger population of 11th graders. 113 students were used, and it looked at health content-based nutrition compared to cosmetic content-based nutrition education. They were broken up into 3 classes, 41 students learning the cosmetic content-based nutrition, 35 with the health content-based nutrition, and 37 students with no nutrition education whatsoever. They were assessed with in-class assessment at baseline and a post-test, as well as a follow-up test 6 months after. It looked into knowledge, attitude towards fruits and vegetables, as well as consumptions of amount and variety of fruits and vegetables. So this research looked into class 1 and saw significant increased knowledge, attitude, and the amount of consumption of fruits and vegetables compared to the 3rd class. However, at the follow-up of 6 months, it was not maintained. And then class 2 saw an increase of knowledge and attitude compared to class 3, but at the follow-up, knowledge and attitude actually declined. So as pointed out, there is some barriers when it comes to virtual gardening as well as nutrition classes. So first was the complaint from the professors that it did not foster the same communal ties as in-person lectures. Also, less effective long-term memory as seen in the previous study, low retention rates in numerous of the studies, as well as reduced curriculum engagement from being virtual. So what can we do about this? First, we're going to look into strategies to improve curriculum engagement. The first that was repeated throughout studies was providing hands-on activities such as cook-along videos. This was great to get the buy-in from the participant, but it also used numerous senses, and it was found throughout research that using more than one of the 5 senses actually also helped with long-term memory. Next was providing live Q&As. This was great for the more introverted participant, Online virtual classes could have awkward pauses and you don't know really when to step in. So this created a great platform to them ask live questions and feel comfortable doing so. As well as the next one, working in smaller groups. So breaking up the classes when time is available to really help with those communal ties and help participants learn to work with each other and get to know each other, not just to help in the classroom, but also networking outside. Next, we're going to go on to focus groups. And what this is a check-in method with the professor as well as the student to make sure they're not getting lost behind that screen. Working with them and checking in after classes just to see and make sure they're obtaining the information. And finally, providing recipes for the participants to use outside of the class. This is a fun version to get those hands-on experiences, and it's making less work for them if it's already provided. So I repeated more than once now the greatness about making cooking videos and getting hands-on from your participants. But how do we go about this? So here's some tips when creating cooking videos. The first is assess your time. They take more time than you would think with prepping numerous areas in the kitchen, grocery shopping that needs to take place, and the amount of time that we'll spend actually filming this activity. If you don't have the time, it's okay, but always ask for help when you need it and just make sure you plan out for this. Next is know your process. Look into if you want to have a cook-along video where the participants work with you one-on-one, or if you want a step-by-step format where they just watch you perform and then they'll use a sheet later on to perform independently on their own. Additionally, should this be live, or do you want a pre-recorded session so they can pause and go at their own pace, as well as look back on it in a different date? Next, learn about production. There's so many great free resources out there if you're worried about lighting or different harsh components. Foodandnutrition.org is just one we want to provide for you today to get you started. Next, have the right equipment. You want to set the right expectations and show them the correct techniques. So in order to do so, your hands will be messy. You want to set up your camera and possibly a tripod to get the right angles and make it easy for you as well. And then set a date. It gets you excited, gives you something to look forward to, but it also tests those organization and time management skills to make sure everything's done in time. So next, look at the layout and how you want to present this video. Number one is the introduction. Include the final product, get your buy-in and get them really excited right off the bat, and include an ingredients list. If it's a cook-along video, I would suggest actually providing this a week prior so the students have time to prepare, but make sure all the ingredients are out, as well as all the equipment. Get all your tools out and show it on the video. It will get them prepared and it will also help you double check yourself. Next is record every step of the cooking process. No step is too small. The more is better. You don't know your skill set of what audience may be watching this, so the more you cover, the better experience it will be for everyone overall. And then record the serving of the dish. A lot of people leave out the pan to dish transfer, but that is a technique and skill. And you want to show them exactly how each step should be done because we're trying to build confidence here. And then fill your final dish. You want to show them how pretty and great it is, and then this way they can compare. So food plating tips while recording. First, plan out your dish. You want to show on your plate, where am I going to put my protein, my carbs, my vegetables ahead of time, and keep it simple. You want to make the main focus, the main part of your dish, and you don't want to add too much to take focus away from that. Next, you want to balance out your dish. We want this to be functional. We're teaching them how to cook, but you also want to teach them how to consume the correct amount of food. That's why going on to the next point, get the right proportion size. We want to make this a realistic expectation and show them exactly visually how a correct plate should look. And then next, highlight the key ingredients. Show your main point of your dish and focus on it, which also brings us to the color is key. We want to make this visually pleasing so they're excited to try the food as well as create it. Then you want to show food with sauce, add a little pizzazz to it, something extra. Also, sauces just taste great, so you want to show all the components. And then again, we mentioned this on the previous slide, using the correct equipment is crucial. You want them to see how this is done correctly and set no unrealistic expectations, because that could take away from their confidence building. Check your timing to make sure you're showing the plating in every step, and then find your style. Your cooking style come out, and then it'll show them to find their own style while cooking and making it unique. And then we discussed about finding recipes ahead of time for participants to make their lives a little bit easier. So here are 4 great resources to use to find great healthy recipes: My Plate Kitchen, Cooking Light, Eating Well, as well as Taste from Home.
So another barrier that some of the previous research identified was the difficulty in fostering community ties. A virtual platform can be isolating, and sometimes it's difficult to have people then engage with others who could provide social support or encourage them. So you can encourage those who are joining your programs virtually to look for local resources. There might be a local cooperative extension agency or perhaps a library nearby. And so you might provide them with some links, perhaps even sign-up sheets or ways that they can connect if they're interested with each other, and perhaps meet in a location nearby if they don't live too far from each other. Sometimes there are also local volunteer opportunities where the participants can share their gardening or new cooking skills, maybe with a food pantry or a shelter that's looking for people to help out with cooking, maybe even some local gardening activities. So depending on where your participants live, you can connect them with other resources beyond just those of your particular class that can help them make ties in the community. New Jersey is fortunate to have some wonderful local resources, but there are certainly cooperative extension agencies across the country. We've listed a few examples in New Jersey, but if you are elsewhere in the United States, seek out your local cooperative extension agents and see what resources they have available for you. In addition to being able to connect participants, they may provide nice websites, PDFs of information about gardening or cooking, safely preparing or preserving food. And so those can be great for your participants as well. An additional barrier that we want to work to overcome in the virtual setting is difficulties with meaningful learning. And sometimes it's difficult to learn when distracted by the computer, and certainly when not being able to connect directly with activities like cooking, and that can make it more difficult to make meaningful connections. So we had a few tips that we encountered as we searched through the literature, and then that we'll share that we used in some of our own research. You might have noticed that some of the virtual activities provide a PDF or a virtual handout for participants. A workbook perhaps can be helpful for participants to follow along with and then look back upon. We can also use a combination of activities, even through cooking videos or through other things that are done during the virtual workshops, to try to stimulate participants visually, their kinesthetic learning, their hearing, and also their tactile senses. And so VAKT teaching focuses on these different areas, and hopefully by engaging numerous parts of the brain, participants will be more likely to learn in a way that is meaningful, making additional neural pathways or reinforcing visual and auditory pathways in the brain through movement and touch. So they may watch someone perform cooking skills on the screen, or perhaps starting a garden, and they may actually try it themselves, and that involves some muscle movement and muscle memories that hopefully they'll learn what to do when cooking or chopping food or plating food or planting a garden. They might hear someone recite the steps needed for a particular recipe. And finally, they use their sense of touch as they're cooking, gardening, or even working their way through a workbook or other activities. So when it's possible, giving participants perhaps a kit to use as they're following along with a virtual workshop can be very beneficial. If that's not possible, perhaps giving a supply list can be helpful so that they can go shopping on their own.
So this is the final research we're going to review today, and this looks at another curriculum, Just Say Yes. This curriculum was created to be in person, and because of COVID-19 also had to switch virtually. So it looked at a population of 22 adults who qualified for SNAP ED benefits, and it was 13 weekly lessons from the Just Start Yes curriculum, but now was via Zoom. 35 to 45 minutes supplemental classes of self-recorded cooking demonstrations. And after 3 weeks or 3 lessons, participants took a post-survey. So what did they find out? So out of 22 participants, 6 completed the survey, which, as mentioned previously, is a concern when it comes to retention rates. All respondents strongly agreed that they preferred virtual participation, which was great. 83% strongly agreed that they understood new material and could confidently prepare it. 67 found those cook-along videos we're talking about extremely useful. 83% indicated an increase of fruit consumption, while 67% of respondents indicated an increase of vegetable consumption.
You mentioned the retention rate can be a difficulty and barrier in nutrition education in general, but particularly in the virtual setting. It's hard sometimes to track participants. They may start out in an online class and then get bumped off due to a faulty internet connection, or just simply disappear, and you can't really follow up with them the way you would like to. And so this is certainly a challenge, as you can see from some of the previous studies that involved virtual cooking videos. About 67% of responders found the videos were actually useful and helped them stick with the course. Obviously, there were some who did not. In another study, participants, about 83%, agreed that they understood new material and could confidently prepare the provided recipes. And so having recipes and a place where they could interact helped them to stick with the course. And yet, there are obviously in both groups some folks who were not helped by these or retained. And so we often would like to know, what could we do to really make everyone feel like they can participate well? It's probably impossible to have 100% participation rate all the time, but we like to increase participation and retention as much as possible. So with some of those barriers in mind and some of the background information in mind, we decided to adapt a currently available nutrition education and gardening program to the virtual setting. And so this brings us to Project Nourish, which we're working on over the last few months. We used a 5-lesson gardening education program called Energize Your Life, and this was developed to be in person by faculty at Washington State University using resources they had as part of their cooperative extension. They had pilot tested the original curriculum, found it to be effective. And so we wondered, could this be adapted for a virtual setting? We were particularly excited that it was based upon the social cognitive theory and adult learning theory, and had some very nice components that allowed, or we hoped would allow it to be effective in there. Taught participants how to grow vegetables on their windowsills. It added some cooking components and had a lot of very practical information for them. So we took these lessons and activities based on what we learned from our literature review, sought to adapt them to the virtual setting. We used a number of questionnaires to track our participants. They included the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Survey. There's a brief fruit and vegetable screener that the CDC has developed. We wanted to know how much produce participants were consuming and whether that would change during the course of the virtual gardening program. We also had a gardening questionnaire to learn a little bit more about their interest in consuming produce, recipes they preferred, their experience, and what they felt would work best for them during a gardening class. So we had 12 participants involved. There were 6 who were from the community or who were staff at Kean University, and then 6 who were students. They all started with a very high interest level, or in general had a high interest level in gardening. And we asked them about their goals. They were interested in increasing fruit and vegetables. Many were interested in adding more color to their plate or consuming more produce and with different kinds of recipes. Some had had gardening experience before, and some had not. Some told us they had been very successful. About 6 had been very successful as gardeners, and 6 had limited or unsuccessful gardening experiences. We'll talk a little about some of the activities that were part of the program in just a moment. The lesson plans included a variety of topics ranging from how to start your seeds, how to read a seed packet, to harvesting produce, keeping seeds from growing season to growing season, storing your produce, and preparing it safely. We found that produce consumption did not seem to significantly change. However, very similar to the other studies we mentioned, we had a difficult time getting all of the participants, or we found that it was difficult to have all the participants complete the follow-up survey. We surveyed them all at baseline and found that some just did not answer the final survey, which was a challenge. They did indicate, however, that during the course of the project, they had enjoyed having videos, since we videotaped all of the lesson activities and the workshops. We hosted them on Zoom, but also recorded the sessions. They really liked having those sessions recorded so they could play the video back and go over things that they might have missed again. They enjoyed seeing their plants grow as they followed along with us, planted and watered and harvested their plants. And they enjoyed the cooking videos that we made and shared during the Zoom session and then made available to them afterwards, as well as the recipes and additional resources we provided. Similar to some of the other studies that were described, we created a PDF and also Google Docs that had materials for the participants. We'll show you some examples of those. They were readily available during the workshops as well as afterwards. So clearly for the future, we would like to know a little bit more about how to retain participants, at least to the point where they would like to complete the survey at the end. If there's a follow-up that's needed or a post-survey questionnaire, it would be great to have everyone participate in that. It's always difficult, though, to get that level of retention. Perhaps there are populations that would most likely benefit from a virtual setting, and others who might really do best in an in-person gardening program. And it's not exactly clear which groups would work best in which setting, and so it would be great to learn more about that. And then what types of resources would support their continued participation. Our participants told us they would really find having access to seeds and gardening supplies would be very helpful. And so it would be nice to know how to best serve participants and get them the access to those supplies. We mentioned using windowsill gardens, and we actually gave each of our participants a kit that they could use. And so we've got some additional information in case you're interested in starting a workshop that focuses on indoor gardening and use windowsill gardening. We've got a few tips here of what you might like to include. So we gave our participants a number of items just in a nice paper bag that they could include. We had a small greenhouse that fits right on their windowsill and some additional pots to put larger plants in as their plants grew. We gave them a variety of seeds. We included things like chili peppers, arugula, other greens. And this was based on the initial survey that we distributed asking, what would you like to grow? We wanted them to tell us what they preferred to grow and harvest. And based on that, we gave them each ample seeds. We gave them potting soil. Perhaps string could be included if some of the plants might grow larger and need to be tied up. But we weren't able to give good lighting. Sometimes a string of Christmas lights or holiday lights can be very useful to provide additional lighting if you're growing or your participants are growing plants in a shady area. Wrapping those around can add a little more light. And a plate or tray to place your plants on to avoid water on your windowsill or countertop can be beneficial as well. So we gave each of our participants a nice kit with those items. Mrs. Sasmita gave quite a few tips to participants during each of our sessions to help them as they were growing. Windowsill garden has a few requirements. So Plants do need sun. And we encourage our participants to choose a sunny spot, getting at least 5 hours of sunlight each day so that plants that need full sun can grow adequately. We told them that they could use other containers, and we gave them some. Many times participants will want to use additional containers. So any small pot that is safe for growing plants that has a drainage hole should work. Something that's clean is usually best. A small size plastic pot, even a ceramic or clay pot can work, although they're delicate and sometimes are more prone to cracking or breaking. Plants do need routine watering. Some of our participants told us that they found themselves overwatering, so it's important to demonstrate and show them the correct amount of water to give depending on the crops being planted. Sasmita also showed how to prune or harvest your plants. We did that right on the live stream, and participants really appreciate being able to watch step by step and then replay the video to try to harvest or prune their plants on their own. So that was great. Of course, we had to remind them not to cut off any healthy plant parts and to keep water from accumulating. Some mentioned issues with mold or flies, so it's important to keep the water from accumulating. And we also talked about fertilizer. So as the plants grew each week, we tried to add appropriate topics to the live stream workshops. When it was appropriate, talked about water and then fertilizing, as well as harvesting and caring for the plants long term. The plants that you choose can really depend on the time of year and also what your participants would like to grow. Obviously, some plants prefer warmer and some prefer cooler temperatures. We found herbs are very easy to grow in a small space. Other leafy greens can be easy to grow too. So arugula, leafy greens like lettuce or spinach, basil, cilantro, parsley require moist soil. Chives, thyme, sage, rosemary, and oregano need less water. Microgreens are another popular choice. Even allium family crops like onions or garlic. And depending on the size of your pot, small carrots or radishes, if you've got a big enough pot, can be good options too. Those are things that are easier to grow and quite nutritious. Then we showed participants how to harvest the greens. We explained to them to be careful, only pick a couple of leaves or a small part unless you don't want to have your plant growing anymore. If you pick off all the leaves, that's the end of your plant, which might be fine if it's the end of your season and you're finished with your garden. You don't want to take anything from the main branch. You want to avoid possible damage and just take a little at a time. Then you'll be able to continue your garden. So the cook along videos were a key part of our project, as were cook along videos and some of the others that we mentioned in previous research. Gardening activities were also a nice hands-on project that we could include. And then we had some other activities as well. We took activities that had been part of the original Energizer-like curriculum. We tried to adapt them to a virtual setting. As we did that and also looked through previous research, we tried to come up with some tips that might be helpful for others who want to develop activities of their own in the virtual setting to try to increase retention and participation and hopefully meaningful learning. So here are some tips of things to include. If your activities involve bring something to class, maybe it's just bring something over to the computer, try to let participants know the week before what will be needed. Maybe they need to bring their plant along with them. Maybe you want them to cook and they need to get some grocery items. So give them a list and then show on screen what's needed. You might even email them a reminder. We found small group activities could be helpful. Depending on the size, they might work better in some groups than others. If you use Zoom, you can have breakout groups. Other platforms may allow breakout groups too. You can predetermine those and then have them ready to go right when you need them. Activities that involve multiple senses are also great, as we saw. So you might include cards. You can include them in a pack that you give to participants before the workshops begin. You could have them make them PDF and have them as a printable item for participants, or something they can just pull up on their phone or on screen and use. A script is helpful, so you know what you're going to say and what comes next, especially if you're repeating the class a few times. It keeps it consistent between sessions. You can include instructions. You can include questions to ask the students during the activity. And of course, it's always a good idea to practice ahead of time to make sure your cooking activity or harvesting activity will fit within the time that's available. And thinking back towards the theoretical models we described, it's great to have activities that fit with those, let those models guide your workshop and also the activities that you choose. So we mentioned that Project Nourish was based upon the social cognitive theory and adult learning theory. So providing gardening kits for participants to follow along on screen as they modeled activities, as they discussed benefits, was helpful, kind of targeted outcome expectations so the participants would know what to expect, what should happen. We encourage participants to show their plants on screen, or if they couldn't do that, to upload a photo to a shared document, or maybe there's a website you can make or some other way to share content so they can talk with each other and provide support. Say, hey, this is what my plant looks like. Did you encounter these issues? How are your plants doing? We emphasize material that would help participants gain knowledge and skills that support gardening and produce consumption, targeting behavioral capability. When gardening often takes a few weeks to have plants grow anyway, but running a multi-week program gave participants time to set goals, problem solve, targeting self-control, build self-efficacy, and also taste their produce. Get them to the point where they're harvesting their produce, they can taste it, and hopefully that will reinforce healthy eating. And then we surveyed participants to gauge their interests and prior experience. I want to show you a few of the examples that we used, a few activity examples, and hopefully as we do that, you can get some ideas for activities that you might want to build on your own. This first one was an activity that was part of the original Energize Your Life curriculum. We adapted it for the virtual setting. And so this was an activity that included a diagram of plant parts. We had that in a workbook, which was sent to participants as a document. They could bring it up on screen and scroll through it during the workshops. We also gave them a file of vegetables. They had photographs of vegetables and different edible plant parts. We asked them to look at the workbook, identify which part of the plant was edible, compare that to the fruit and vegetable cards. We sent those through a shared document too, although they could have been printed and given to the participants, depending on the group you're working with. And then we gave them some examples of strengths of different vegetables, nutrients that they're rich in, or the good sources of fiber. We gave them a chance to do some discussion, to think about plants that had lots of vitamins, were highest in fiber. Which ones do you like to eat? Do you have a preference for different plant parts? We then connected that to the nutrition labels that you might see in the grocery store. We gave them some additional resources, and these are great even if you're making a slightly different activity, but still looking to teach participants about the nutrients different produce contains and how to read a food label. We have guidingstars.com, which is a website that has a range of foods and different products, and stars are used, and these are often seen on the front of food packaging, so participants may have encountered them already, to show whether the food has more vitamins, or minerals, more whole grains, or is it higher in added sodium, added sugars, saturated fat, nutrients that perhaps we want to consume less of. So we're able to connect the produce to food labels that they might encounter in the grocery store. The FDA has a wonderful website talking about how to read a food label, and so that's another example of a great resource that can walk participants through using food labels. And then we connected that to the seed packets. So if we found arugula or another item that we might grow, we connected that to the seed packet by having them look at the seeds we had given and look through some of the planting information to get an idea of how they would plant and harvest this item. Later in the workshop, we're able to talk about the actual harvesting and preparation of these, coming full circle as we thought about nutrients in the plant and the food that results from it, as well as the initial steps needed to actually plant and harvest the seed. Another great resource we found was myplate.gov. Myplate.gov is the USDA's resource. And participants may be familiar with this already, as it often appears in grocery stores. Virtually online in that sort of setting, you can encourage participants to go to MyPlate, get their MyPlate plan. They'll get information about the number of calories and the amounts of different nutrients that they need. There are lots of other great resources there too for your virtual class that you could be thinking about. So maybe you want them to look for favorite recipes with a particular item that they have been growing. They could go to MyPlate Kitchen. That's great recipes. Maybe you're looking for some other handouts specific to different items they might be planting and harvesting. MyPlate.gov has some great PDF versions of handouts that you could post or link to so participants can get more information. We wanted to wish you happy gardening. If you do have questions, though, please don't hesitate to send an email. My email is there on screen. If you'd like to read more about our research or any of the other studies, we'll share some of the resources that we've used. As I mentioned already, the CDC, the myplate.gov website, the USDA are great resources for you. You can also look at your local cooperative extension agency. We hope that you'll have an excellent time as you garden, and we can't wait to hear all of the tasty things that you grow. Thanks for participating today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, everyone. I see there are some questions. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm going to take a few moments to address the questions in the chat, but if you have additional questions or think of something afterwards, feel free to ask or email me. So there's a question about a copy of the slides. Sure, if you would like to email me, I'd be happy to send those to you. Some additional information about our research will be published shortly, so I can send you a link to that when it becomes published in Natural Sciences Education. Let's see another question about our vegetables that we chose. So we surveyed our participants early on. We wanted to find out what they were interested in growing. And so we found that for folks in our group, they were really interested in chili peppers. They were interested in salad greens, so lettuce, arugula, spinach grows well too, though we didn't use it this time around. I've grown spinach before with students growing at home, and that has worked really well. I've also used small carrots. There's some very small, almost baby-sized carrots that grow pretty quickly. We mentioned that radishes work pretty well. So the time can vary a little in terms of, or depending on the variety. So microgreens grow very quickly. You can grow some microgreens and have them ready to harvest in like 2-3 weeks at most. So those are probably the fastest. The salad greens that we were growing over the 5-week period were mostly big enough to harvest, assuming the participants started on time, didn't have any mess ups or need for a do-over, like their cat knocked over the pod or there was some other issue that they had. So they were able to harvest a couple of small leaves by the end if everything went well. Of course, if you let your plants keep growing through more of the growing season, over a couple of months, you would get a nicer harvest too. So when I've grown plants with my students over a full semester, 16 weeks, they're growing maybe lettuce on a windowsill at home or spinach. By the end of the semester, then they can usually make a very nice salad. So those are some items that we chose because they're easy to grow, didn't require a big trellis or a lot of other supplies. The seed package usually gives you information as well, or even the manufacturer's website might allow you to search by harvest time or the depth of your pot. Often a place like Burpee will allow you to search by a few parameters so you can find what options might work best given your limitations or the size of the containers you have, and then you can find out what your participants would like to grow too, and try to find a balance between those two. Maybe some things that they can harvest immediately and some things that would take a little longer to grow and harvest.
Just looking to see if I have any other questions. I see a note here about the Friendship Garden on your campus. That's wonderful. Yeah, we've found students that came are eager to garden as well, and that's just a wonderful experience for everybody involved. So in terms of participants wanting to continue, as I mentioned, not everyone completed the follow-up survey, but of those who did, they were very eager to keep gardening. And so we gave them extra seeds from the beginning, figuring that maybe some would want to continue gardening, or maybe they just need some more seeds. And they were eager to actually start again. A few had some mess ups, and a few just harvested what they had and wanted to continue. And so I actually sent them more seeds because we had them, and I really wanted to encourage them to keep going. So of those who completed the follow-up survey, they were very eager to continue, and they were excited about that. So as I mentioned, we would really like to repeat the process with a larger group, and we didn't have the ability to do that, but it would be exciting. Yes, and that's what we found. They had wonderful skills, and that's what they were telling us. I just needed something to jumpstart my gardening. It's been a long time. I grew something as a child, but I don't even remember what that was. They were giving us very real feedback, very real comments, which was wonderful to hear. And this gave them a little boost that they need to get going again. And so that was exciting for us.